The letter wasn't meant for him. It wasn't meant for anyone like him. It was written in uneven pencil, the lines pressed too hard in some places, too light in others. The paper was folded 3 times, like it had been opened and closed, before finally being tucked into a red envelope that smelled faintly of cinnamon. Dear Santa, please send me a dad this year. I don't need toys. I just want someone who can come to my school play. I promise I'll be good. The envelope had been part of a holiday charity drive. Hundreds of children's letters collected from a small town elementary school in Ohio. The idea was simple. Volunteers would adopt a letter and fulfill whatever small wish was written inside, but this one hadn't been adopted. It had been misplaced, and then, somehow, it had landed on the polished walnut desk of Daniel Whittaker. Daniel wasn't Santa. He wasn't even particularly kind, at least not in the way people imagine kindness. He was the founder of Whittaker Logistics, a billion-dollar shipping company headquartered in a quiet glass building that overlooked the river in Chicago. At 46, he had everything most people spent their lives chasing: money, power, silence, especially silence. His office was always quiet, the kind of quiet that hummed in your ears, the kind that reminded you no one was waiting for you at home. He had stayed late that night. December wind rattled faintly against the tall windows. The city below glittered in holiday lights. Somewhere, faintly, he could hear carolers on the sidewalk, their voices carried upward by the cold air. He didn't usually pay attention to things like that, but when he noticed the red envelope on his desk, it felt out of place. He picked it up slowly, turned it over, no return address, just Santa, written in careful block letters. Daniel almost tossed it aside. Almost, instead, he opened it. He didn't expect the words to stay with him. He had read countless proposals, contracts, financial reports thicker than a phone book, but this single sheet of paper felt heavier than any of them. Please send me a dad. He read it again and again. He leaned back in his chair. The office lights were dim now. Most of the building had emptied out hours ago. He could see his reflection faintly in the window behind his desk. Gray beginning to show at his temples, eyes that looked tired. He told himself it was ridiculous to feel anything about a child's Christmas wish. He told himself this wasn't his problem, but the sentence wouldn't leave him alone. I just want someone who can come to my school play. He pictured a little auditorium. Folding chairs, parents holding up phones to record shaky videos, a small figure on stage scanning the crowd, searching. Daniel swallowed. He hadn't been to a school play in over 30 years. His father hadn't come to his either. He didn't know why that memory surfaced now. He hadn't thought about his father in years, a distant man. Always working, always saying he was doing it for the family. Daniel had done the same thing, except he had never built the family. He folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope. He told himself he would hand it to his assistant in the morning. Ask her to find the right charity contact. That was the sensible thing, but instead he slipped it into his briefcase. He didn't know why. That night his penthouse felt colder than usual. The marble floors reflected the glow of the Christmas tree in the corner. A tree decorated by a professional designer, perfect ornaments, perfect symmetry, no handmade paper stars. No crooked glitter angels. Daniel poured himself a glass of water and stood there in the quiet. He tried to imagine a little girl sitting somewhere, writing that letter. Erasing words, pressing her lips together as she thought. He wondered what her name was. He looked at the envelope again. In tiny letters at the bottom corner, almost overlooked, was a school stamp, Maple Grove Elementary. The next morning, he told himself it was just curiosity. He asked his assistant, Claire, about the charity drive. She smiled brightly, assuming he wanted to make a generous donation. "Would you like to sponsor a few letters, Mr. Whittaker?" "Just this one," he said, placing the envelope on her desk. She glanced at it and then back at him, slightly surprised. "I'll get the contact information." He nodded. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. By afternoon he had the name attached to the letter. Emily Carter, age 7, second grade. There was a short note from the school counselor attached to the charity file. It explained, gently, that Emily lived with her mother. Her father had left when she was 3, limited contact. No consistent support. Daniel stared at the file longer than he meant to. He told himself he was simply being thorough. He could donate money, pay for extracurricular activities, maybe arrange for a mentor program. There were structured solutions for things like this. But the letter hadn't asked for money. It had asked for someone to show up. That was different. He closed the file and leaned back in his chair again. Through the glass wall of his office, he could see employees moving through the hallway, laughing, planning office holiday parties. Talking about families, Daniel felt separate from it all, not lonely exactly, just outside. That evening he drove past Maple Grove Elementary. He didn't plan to stop, he just wanted to see it. The building was small, brick, Christmas lights strung along the fence. Paper snowflakes taped to the windows. A banner near the entrance read, "Winter Play Friday at 6 p.m. He checked the date on his phone. Friday was tomorrow. He sat in his car longer than necessary, engine idling softly. This was absurd. He was a CEO. He had meetings scheduled months in advance. Investors flying in from New York next week. Contracts waiting, and yet he imagined a little girl scanning a crowd. He turned off the engine. He didn't get out. He just sat there in the dark, watching the lights glow against the early winter sky. For the first time in a long while, Daniel Whittaker felt something he couldn't file, manage, or control. A quiet pull, a question, and as he drove away, the red envelope resting on the passenger seat beside him, he realized he wasn't sure what he was going to do. But he knew he wasn't done with that letter yet. Daniel told himself he would not go. All Friday morning he repeated that decision in his head like a quiet rule. He had a board call at 4, a dinner meeting at 7. His calendar was full in the precise, tidy way he liked it. But the letter sat in the top drawer of his desk. He hadn't meant to bring it again. Still, there it was. Around 3:30, Claire stepped into his office with a folder. "Your 4 o'clock call is confirmed." He nodded. "Move it," she blinked. "Move it to Monday." There was a pause. Daniel didn't move from his seat. He didn't explain. Claire simply nodded, of course. By 5:30, he was back in his car, driving toward Maple Grove. The sky had already darkened. Holiday lights blinked on porches. Families hurried across sidewalks in coats and scarves. He felt strangely aware of everything. The smell of chimney smoke, the sound of children laughing somewhere behind a fence. He parked across from the school this time. Cars filled the small lot. Parents stepped out holding paper programs. A few carried flowers wrapped in plastic. Daniel stayed in his car for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. This is foolish, he thought. He didn't belong here, but the thought of turning the engine back on felt heavier than walking inside. So he stepped out. The air was cold, sharp against his face. Inside, the school hallway buzzed with noise. Children in costume darted between adults. Someone had set up a table with cookies and watered-down punch. Daniel stood near the back wall, unsure what to do with his hands. He felt taller than everyone, more formal. Out of place in his tailored coat. A woman near the entrance handed him a program without asking who he was. He took it. Winter Wishes a Holiday Play by second grade. His eyes scanned the list of names. There it was. Emily Carter Angel #3. Angel #3. He didn't know why that detail tightened something in his chest. The auditorium lights dimmed, parents found seats quickly. Daniel slipped into one near the back, close to the aisle. Children filed onto the stage in oversized costumes, tinsel halos, paper wings that bent at the corners. The music started slightly off-key, guided by a teacher at the piano. Daniel watched the stage carefully. It took him a moment to find her, second row from the left. Blonde hair pulled into a loose ponytail. Halo tilted slightly to one side. Her wings were taped unevenly, one corner already peeling. She stood very straight. When the children began to sing, she sang too, a little louder than the others, like she wanted to make sure someone could hear her. Halfway through the first song, her eyes moved, scanning, left side of the room, then right, then back again. Daniel felt it in his stomach. She was looking for someone. He told himself maybe her mother was here. Maybe she was just nervous, but when the children began their lines, taking turns stepping forward to speak into the standing microphone, he saw her glance again toward the crowd. Her turn came. She walked carefully to the microphone, wings wobbling slightly. "My wish," she said, her voice small but steady, "is that everyone has someone to come home to." The audience let out a soft murmur. A few parents smiled. Daniel didn't. He couldn't, because as she stepped back into line, he saw the quick flicker in her face. The way her mouth tightened just for a second. She had practiced that line, he could tell. She had practiced it so she wouldn't cry. The rest of the play moved on. Laughter, applause, a simple story about kindness and sharing. Daniel barely registered it. He kept watching her. At the end, the children bowed. Parents stood, clapping loudly, phones lifted in the air. Emily bowed too, but her eyes searched one more time, just in case. Daniel didn't stand. He couldn't. Something inside him felt too heavy. When the lights came back on and families began crowding toward the stage, Daniel stayed in his seat. He watched as children ran into waiting arms, fathers lifting daughters, mothers crouching to hug sons. Emily stepped off the stage slowly. She didn't run. A woman approached her, mid-30s, tired eyes, worn winter coat. She knelt and hugged her tightly. Daniel assumed this was her mother. He watched them speak briefly. The mother brushed a strand of hair from Emily's face, smiled, but even from a distance Daniel could see the strain in that smile. They didn't have flowers, they didn't take pictures, they simply gathered Emily's things and began walking toward the exit. Daniel stood before he could think about it. He didn't call out, he didn't approach them, he just followed at a distance, staying near the wall. Outside, the cold hit again. He saw Emily tug on her mother's sleeve. "Did you see me?" she asked. Her mother nodded quickly. "You were perfect. Did you see when I said my line?" "I did." Emily hesitated. Daniel slowed his steps. Did Dad know about it?" The mother stopped walking for just a second. Then she knelt again, her voice softer now. "Honey, you know he's very busy." Emily nodded. Daniel looked away. He felt like an intruder. He didn't know what he thought he would accomplish by coming here. He wasn't prepared to step into someone else's life. He didn't have answers. He barely had space in his own. Emily and her mother walked toward an older sedan parked near the curb. Daniel stood by his car, watching. As Emily climbed into the back seat, she held something in her hand, the program. She looked at it for a long moment before setting it down beside her. Daniel felt a quiet ache spread through him. He could drive away now, forget this, send a donation to the school anonymously, make sure she had whatever she needed materially. That was what he was good at, solving problems with checks. But this wasn't that kind of problem. He slid into his car and closed the door. For a long time he didn't start the engine. He just sat there. The memory of her scanning the crowd replayed again and again. He remembered being 9 years old, standing on a baseball field, glove in hand. Looking toward the bleachers, empty seat. His father had promised he'd come. There had always been a meeting. A trip, something more important. Daniel had told himself it didn't matter. He had built his entire life on proving it didn't matter. But tonight, sitting in the dark parking lot of an elementary school, he realized it had mattered more than he ever admitted. His phone buzzed. A message from Claire reminding him of tomorrow's charity gala. He stared at the screen. Then he looked at the red envelope on the passenger seat again. He didn't know Emily. He wasn't her father. He had no right to step into her world, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that ignoring her letter now would be the same as ignoring his own younger self. Slowly, Daniel started the engine. He didn't drive home. Instead, he turned the car around and pulled back into the school parking lot. The building lights were still on, teachers cleaning up, parents lingering. He didn't have a plan. He didn't even know what he was going to say. But for the first time in years, Daniel Whittaker wasn't thinking about contracts or stock prices. He was thinking about a 7-year-old girl who had stood on a stage and tried very hard not to cry. And he realized something simple. Money could buy almost anything, but it couldn't sit in a folding chair and clap. And tonight, that felt like the only thing that mattered. Daniel didn't walk straight into the school office. He stood just inside the entrance for a moment, brushing snow from his coat like he had simply forgotten something. The hallway was quieter now. The hum of conversation had faded into the sound of folding chairs being stacked somewhere down the hall. A woman carrying a cardboard box of decorations paused when she saw him. "Can I help you?" He cleared his throat. "I was hoping to speak with the principal, just briefly." She looked at him carefully, not suspicious. Just curious. He didn't look like most of the parents who had filled the auditorium. "I'm Mrs. Harris," she said. "I'm the principal." Daniel nodded. Daniel Whittaker. Her eyebrows lifted slightly at the name. Even in a small town, people recognized it. He saw the moment of realization flicker across her face. "Oh," she said softly, "of course." He suddenly felt self-conscious. "I received one of the letters from your holiday drive," he began. Emily Carter's. Mrs. Harris's expression changed. It softened. "Yes," she said quietly. "Emily." They stepped into her small office. It smelled faintly of coffee and peppermint. Paper snowflakes hung in the window. Daniel remained standing. "I attended the play tonight," he said. "I saw her." Mrs. Harris studied him for a long second. "She's a bright little girl," she said. "Very kind, very hopeful." Daniel nodded once. "I'd like to help," he said in a more consistent way. There was a careful pause. "We're grateful for any donations, Mrs." Harris replied gently, "I'm not talking about money." That seemed to surprise her. He wasn't entirely sure what he was talking about either. "I mean mentorship, time, if that's something her mother would consider." The word time felt foreign in his mouth. Mrs. Harris folded her hands on the desk. "Emily's mother is protective," she said, "for good reason. Her father left 3 years ago, promised to stay in touch. That didn't happen." Daniel felt the weight of that settle. "I'm not trying to replace anyone," he said quickly. Mrs. Harris held his gaze. "Then what are you trying to do?" He didn't answer right away because he wasn't certain. Finally, he said, "Show up." The room was quiet after that. Mrs. Harris nodded slowly. "I can speak with her mother. No promises. That's fair." He left his contact information. Nothing flashy, just a phone number. Driving home that night felt different. He wasn't sure what he had just stepped into. He hadn't thought past this moment. There were legal forms, background checks, boundaries to consider. He knew that. He also knew this could be misunderstood. A billionaire offering mentorship to a 7-year-old girl whose father had disappeared. It sounded strange. Maybe it was, but the alternative, doing nothing, felt worse. 2 days later, his phone rang. "A known number," he answered. "Mr. Whittaker." The voice was cautious, female, young but tired. "Yes, this is Laura Carter, Emily's mom." He straightened slightly in his chair. Mrs. Carter, thank you for calling. There was a small exhale on the other end. Mrs. Harris said you wanted to help. He could hear dishes clinking faintly in the background. A television murmuring, I don't want to intrude, Daniel said. I just thought if Emily ever needed someone to attend events, help with school projects, that kind of thing, I could make time. There was silence. Then, carefully, Laura asked why. It wasn't accusing, it was honest. Daniel looked out the window of his office at the gray river below. Because someone should. Another pause. You don't even know us, she said. I know what it feels like, he replied quietly. That hung in the air between them. Laura didn't respond immediately. Finally, she said, Emily asked Santa for a dad, not a sponsor, I know, and you can't promise her something like that. I won't, he said firmly. He meant it. There was a long breath on the other end. We could meet, Laura said at last. Public place, that sounds reasonable. They chose a small cafe near Maple Grove Elementary the following Saturday morning. Daniel arrived early. The cafe smelled like cinnamon rolls and burnt coffee. Families filled most of the tables. When Laura walked in, he recognized her immediately, the same worn winter coat, dark hair pulled back loosely. She looked younger in daylight, early 30s maybe. Emily trailed beside her, holding her hand. Emily spotted him first. Her eyes widened slightly. She tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered something. Laura gave Daniel a polite nod as they approached. Mr. Whittaker, Daniel, please. They sat. Emily studied him openly. Children didn't bother hiding curiosity. You were at the play, she said. Daniel nodded. You did a good job. Her shoulders lifted a little at that. You saw my line. I did. She looked down at the table, tracing a finger along a sugar packet. Laura cleared her throat. Emily, why don't you grab us a napkin? Emily slid off her chair and wandered a few steps away. Laura leaned forward slightly. I'm going to be honest, she said. This makes me nervous. It should, Daniel replied. That surprised her. I don't need money, she continued. We manage, barely, but we manage. I understand. What I don't want, she said, her voice tightening, is someone coming into her life and then disappearing. Daniel felt that sentence like a direct hit. I won't make promises I can't keep, he said carefully. I travel. I work long hours, but if I commit to something, I show up. Laura studied his face, searching for something. What exactly are you offering? She asked. Daniel thought about it. Attendance, he said. Consistency, maybe helping with school projects, being available. He didn't use the word father. He wouldn't. Emily returned and climbed back into her chair. She looked between them. Mom says you're busy, she said bluntly. Daniel almost smiled. I am? Then why are you here? The simplicity of the question took his breath for a second. Because sometimes busy people forget what matters, he said. I'm trying not to. Emily tilted her head, considering that. Are you married? She asked. Laura's eyes widened slightly. Emily, it's okay, Daniel said gently. No, I'm not. Do you have kids? No. She nodded slowly, processing. Do you like school plays? He paused. I didn't think I did, he admitted, but I liked yours. A small smile appeared on her face. It wasn't big. But it was real. They talked for nearly an hour. Nothing dramatic, just simple things. Emily's favorite subject, art. Her dislike of math, the fact that she wanted to be a veterinarian because animals don't leave. Daniel caught Laura's eyes at that comment. They didn't say anything. When it was time to leave, Laura stood first. We'll start small, she said. There's a science fair in January if you want to come. I'll be there. Emily looked up at him. Really? As they walked toward the door, Emily hesitated. Mr. Whittaker? Yes. She held out the folded program from the play. You can keep this, she said. In case you forget. Daniel took it carefully. I won't forget. But as he watched them leave, a quiet realization settled in. This wasn't about one school play or one science fair. This was about stepping into something unpredictable, messy, human, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt something unfamiliar but steady growing beneath the surface. Not obligation, not charity, something closer to responsibility, and it both scared him and warmed him in equal measure. January came with sharp wind and gray skies. Daniel kept his word. He stood in the Maple Grove Gymnasium on the night of the science fair, holding a paper cup of weak coffee while children explained baking soda volcanoes and cardboard solar systems. Emily's project sat on a folding table near the back wall. Animal behavior and safe homes. The poster board read in bright marker. She had drawn pictures of dogs in shelters and small houses with fenced yards. There were printed photos glued unevenly to the board. A handwritten paragraph at the bottom explained how animals need stable homes to feel safe. Daniel read that paragraph twice. When Emily spotted him walking toward her table, her face lit up in a way that caught him off guard. "You came," she said. "I said I would." Laura stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching carefully. Not distant, just cautious. Emily launched into her presentation, her words tumbling out too fast at first. "So when animals move around a lot, they get nervous, and sometimes they don't eat, and sometimes they hide and slow down." Daniel said gently. "Start again." She inhaled and tried again, steadier this time. As she spoke, Daniel noticed something small. She kept glancing at him, not searching, just checking, like she was making sure he was still there. And he was. That became a pattern. He attended 2 more school events that winter, a parent-teacher meeting where he mostly listened, an art showcase where Emily proudly showed him a painting of a golden retriever standing in front of a blue house. "Stable home," she explained. Daniel nodded. Laura remained polite but reserved. She didn't invite him inside when he dropped Emily off after the science fair. She kept conversations brief, but the tension from that first cafe meeting had softened. One evening in February, as snow fell thick and quiet outside, Daniel found himself sitting at Laura's small kitchen table. It wasn't planned. Emily had insisted on showing him her report card, and Laura had finally said, "You might as well come in for a minute. It's freezing." The kitchen was warm. Modest, mismatched chairs, a calendar with grocery coupons clipped to it. Daniel felt strangely at ease there. Emily spread her report card on the table. All A's except math, she admitted. Daniel smiled slightly. "Math can be learned." "I don't like it," she said. "I didn't either." Laura looked up at that. "You didn't?" "No." Emily stared at him like this information changed something important. "You're rich, though," she said plainly. Laura covered her face briefly. "Emily." Daniel let out a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. "Math gets easier when you practice," he said, "and when someone explains it in a way that makes sense." Emily considered that. "Will you help me?" she asked. The question was simple, but it landed heavier than she knew. "Yes," he said. That night, driving home, Daniel realized something unsettling. He was rearranging meetings, blocking off evenings, declining invitations without resentment, without calculation. He hadn't told anyone at work why. Claire had noticed. "You've been leaving earlier lately," she said one afternoon, tone neutral but observant. "I have," he replied. She didn't press, but the board did. At the next executive meeting, one of the directors mentioned his recent absence from a networking dinner. "We need visibility right now," the man said. "Competitors are moving." Daniel listened quietly. He had spent 20 years building Whittaker Logistics into something untouchable. He knew the numbers better than anyone. The company wasn't fragile, but his attention was no longer singular. And people noticed. That evening, he arrived at Maple Grove for a small classroom event. Emily was reading aloud from a short book she had written. Her voice trembled slightly at first. Daniel took his seat near the middle this time, not the back. Halfway through her reading, she looked up and met his eyes. Her voice steadied. Afterward, she ran to him without hesitation. "You didn't even check your phone," she said, impressed. "I turned it off." Laura approached more slowly. "I hope this isn't interfering with your life," she said quietly. Daniel looked at her. "It is," he answered honestly. Her expression shifted, concern rising, but not in a bad way. She studied him for a long moment. "I don't want her getting attached if this is temporary," Laura said softly. Daniel felt that word again, temporary. "I'm not planning an exit," he replied. Laura crossed her arms, but this time it wasn't defensive. "It's just," she said carefully. Her father used to promise things too. Birthdays, recitals, he meant it at first. I think he did, but life got in the way. Daniel knew that story. "Different details, same ending. I can't change what he did," he said. "I'm not trying to replace him." "Then what are you trying to be?" He didn't answer immediately. Emily was across the room now, laughing with a friend. Daniel watched her for a moment before speaking. Reliable. The word felt small but true. Spring approached slowly. Daniel began spending one evening a week at their house helping with homework. He wasn't good at everything. He stumbled explaining fractions. He had to look up long division steps on his phone once, which made Emily laugh. "You're not perfect," she said. "No." He admitted. "That's okay." Those words stayed with him. One Sunday afternoon, after they finished a math worksheet, Emily looked up suddenly. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." She hesitated. "Are you going to be my dad?" The room felt very quiet. Laura was in the kitchen. He could hear the faint sound of running water. Daniel set his pen down slowly. "I'm not your dad," he said gently. Her face didn't fall. She just listened. "But I can be someone who shows up if you want that." She thought about it. "Like a practice dad." He almost smiled. "Maybe more like a steady friend." She nodded. "Okay." No tears. No drama, just acceptance. But that night, alone in his penthouse, Daniel felt the weight of it all settle fully for the first time. This wasn't a charity project anymore. It wasn't a temporary act of goodwill. He had stepped into their lives. And they had stepped into his. His home, once silent, now felt too large when he returned to it. He found himself missing the sound of pencils scratching on paper, the hum of a small television in the background, the way Emily asked questions without filtering them. He began to wonder something he hadn't allowed himself to consider before. What if this wasn't just about showing up? What if it was about belonging? The thought both warmed and frightened him, because belonging meant risk. And Daniel Whittaker had spent most of his adult life avoiding risk of the emotional kind. But as winter melted into early spring, he could feel the shift inside himself. He was no longer just attending events. He was invested, and for the first time in decades, the possibility of losing something felt real. Which meant, quietly, that he had finally gained something worth losing. Spring came softly that year. The snow melted into quiet puddles along the sidewalks of Maple Grove. The air felt lighter. Children stayed outside longer. Windows were cracked open just enough to let in the sound of birds. Daniel noticed the change because he was there to see it. He had begun stopping by on Sunday afternoons without needing a reason. Sometimes it was homework. Sometimes it was just to sit at the small kitchen table and listen to Emily talk about her week. Laura no longer hovered in the doorway. She trusted him now, not completely, not blindly, but enough. One evening in late April, Daniel arrived to find the front yard scattered with chalk drawings, hearts, stick figures, a dog with oversized ears. Emily sat cross-legged on the sidewalk. "Look," she said when she saw him. "This one's you." He stepped closer. The stick figure had short gray lines at the temples. "That's accurate," he said. She grinned. Laura leaned against the porch railing, arms folded loosely. "She's been out here all afternoon," she said. refused to come inside. Daniel crouched down next to the chalk drawings. "What's this one?" he asked, pointing to a drawing of three figures holding hands. Emily shrugged casually, but her voice softened. "That's just people who don't leave." Daniel didn't respond right away. He just nodded. That night, after Emily went inside to wash up for dinner, Laura remained on the porch with him. "You've changed," she said quietly. Daniel looked at her. "How?" "You look less alone." He considered that. He thought about his penthouse, the marble floors, the perfectly arranged Christmas tree from months ago. The silence. He thought about the chalk dust now clinging to the knees of his slacks. "I am," he admitted. Laura studied him carefully. "You know she talks about you at school," she said. "She doesn't call you Dad, but she says she has someone who comes." Daniel felt something settle deeply in his chest. "I don't want to confuse her," he said. "You haven't," Laura replied. "You've been honest." There was a long pause between them. "You're allowed to be part of our lives," she added softly. "You don't have to stand on the outside." Daniel had spent most of his life on the outside. Observing, providing, controlling, belonging had always seemed complicated. But standing there, in the quiet warmth of early evening, he realized something simple. Belonging wasn't loud, it was consistent. In May, Emily's class held a small award ceremony, nothing dramatic. Just certificates printed on thin paper and handed out in the school gym. Daniel arrived early. He didn't sit in the back this time. He chose a seat in the second row when Emily's name was called. For outstanding effort and kindness, she walked up confidently. No scanning the crowd this time, she knew. When she returned to her seat, she looked directly at him and gave a small nod. After the ceremony, she ran toward him, certificate waving in the air. "Did you see?" "I did." "Did you see when they said my name?" "I heard it clearly." She smiled wide, then hesitated. "Can I introduce you to my teacher?" "Of course." As she pulled him toward Mrs. Harris, she spoke without hesitation. "This is Daniel," she said proudly. "He always comes." The teacher smiled warmly at him. "That matters more than you know," she said quietly. Daniel nodded, unable to speak for a moment. That night, something shifted fully, not in a dramatic way. There were no declarations, no sudden changes in titles, just a quiet understanding. In June, Daniel made a decision that surprised even himself. He reduced his hours at the company, not drastically. The board resisted at first. Investors questioned it. But he had built Whittaker Logistics strong enough to run without his constant presence. For the first time, he allowed himself to step back. To create space, he didn't announce why. He didn't need to. One Sunday afternoon, Emily sat at the kitchen table drawing again. Daniel watched her from across the room. "Do you remember your letter?" he asked gently. She looked up. "To Santa?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. "I don't think Santa got it," she said. Daniel felt a small, steady warmth in his chest. "Sometimes," he replied, "letters take the long way around." She thought about that. Then she slid off her chair and walked toward him. Without asking, without ceremony, she wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't dramatic, it was simple. A child's hug. He held her carefully. Laura stood in the doorway, watching. There were tears in her eyes, but she wasn't crying out of sadness. Later that evening, as the sun set through the kitchen window, Emily looked up at him from her chair. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I didn't need a different dad." Daniel waited. "I just needed someone who stays." He swallowed. "I can do that," he said quietly, and he meant it. Months passed. Summer arrived fully, bringing longer days and open windows. Daniel still traveled for work. He still wore tailored suits and sat in boardrooms, but now his calendar included school events. Weekend breakfasts, occasional trips to the park. He wasn't trying to replace anyone. He wasn't trying to rewrite the past. He was simply present, and that presence changed all of them in small, steady ways. One evening in late summer, as cicadas hummed outside and Emily chased fireflies in the yard, Daniel stood beside Laura on the porch. You know, she said softly, she doesn't ask about Santa anymore. Daniel smiled faintly. Good. Laura glanced at him. She doesn't need to. And in that quiet, ordinary moment Daniel understood something fully. He had not answered a letter to become a hero. He had answered it because he recognized the ache inside it, and in doing so he had unknowingly answered the ache inside himself too. There were no fireworks, no dramatic announcements, just a steady unfolding of days, and that was enough. Final ending: if you had walked past Maple Grove Elementary that winter, you would never have noticed the red envelope. It wasn't special, just paper, pencil, a child's handwriting, but sometimes the smallest requests carry the deepest weight. Please send me a dad. The letter hadn't created something out of nothing. It had simply opened a door. A man who had everything learned that presence mattered more than power. A little girl who had learned not to expect too much discovered that some people do stay. And a mother who had been bracing herself for disappointment found slowly that trust can grow again. No one used grand words. No one forced a new title. They just kept showing up for one another, and in the quiet rhythm of that consistency, something steady and real took root. Not because it was promised, but because it was practiced, and sometimes that's what makes all the difference.